Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sorry for the technical issues. We've kind of got a patch on it for now, and we'll sort the rest out for later. So today we're going to be talking about product, joined by one of our friends, Vidya, which is awesome. And I guess a few housekeeping things. If you are not using Chrome, you should be. It's the best browser to support Crowdcast. And you definitely want to be plugged into charge or power so that the video quality is good. So I guess this talk is going to be an extension of our Sales and Marketing Jam, which happens every 6 months in New Zealand. So today we're really talking about product. What is it? Why does it matter? And what is the role of a product manager? And I guess a funny story of how San Francisco works is that Vidya and I actually met from one of the alumni of the Kiwi landing pad based in San Francisco. And so they shared an Uber there. They figured out that they were both sort of, Vidya is obviously a Kiwi, and Austin used to work here. So then they connected me to them. And here we are. So that's a really awesome way of, I guess, serendipitous connections that San Francisco has going on. So I'm going to hand over and yeah, I guess have a good time and ask all of your questions below. I see that we don't have any yet, so I hope we do have some, and upvote other people's questions. And I guess if you have anything to say or you want to know something, you can just write it in the chat and we'll get to it. Awesome. Okay, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Perfect. So thanks for that. I'm excited to be talking to you, hopefully some New Zealand as well as some stateside. And we're going to talk about product management. And as Sian just talked about, like when we first got introduced together, I hadn't heard about the Kiwi landing pad. So shame on me. I'm a Kiwi. We've lived in the States for a long time and support a lot of local entrepreneurs and founders, but hadn't really heard about anything happening with Kiwis here. So we got talking. I shared what I did, and she said, well, gosh, there's a lot of interest in like what happens with product. So if you flip to the next slide, she shared with me the research that she did. And there was over 30 quotes from people talking about trying to understand how to launch in the States, thinking about the product and market fit for a US audience, thinking about product lifecycle. So that was one piece of the puzzle. And then the next piece, and I apologize, there's some builds, but we had a problem with slides. So you're just going to see this kind of like in its entirety in a PDF. So bear with us. But the second piece of the puzzle slide is I was home about a few months ago. I'm from Wellington, so I use any excuse to put home up there. So there's some pictures. And I gave a lecture at Vic at the business school. And it was a lecture theatre. It's probably exactly that lecture theatre. And I was talking about innovation and how to create an innovation culture, but also the process of how do you build new products. And it was a lecture full of people. And what struck me is the difference between talking here in workshops and in lectures and talking at home is that like nobody asked a question. It was silence. It was painful trying to get people to come out and ask. And it sort of struck me, because this is exactly how it was when I grew up in New Zealand a long time ago. There's this culture and mindset and just this attitude towards sort of how we interact that might be useful to bring in to the conversation we have product, because it's critical. That communication aspect is absolutely vital. So when we brought those two together, next slide, the topic turned to be, how do you build awesome products, but also what kind of mindset and approach do you need to be truly successful here? So that's what we're going to spend the next half an hour or so talking about, and there should be plenty of time for questions. So please don't be like that lecture theatre at Vic, like ask lots of questions, okay? Don't leave me here by myself. Okay, so what we're going to cover is I'm going to give you a quick intro into me, just give you how this all comes together and why I'm talking to you about product, and then go into what's a product manager. There's so much confusion, so we'll talk about that. Switch to what do I think makes, how do you build products that customers love, and then a couple of tips for us, for the Kiwis. Okay, so with me, I'm from Wellington. I did my undergrad at Vic and in software engineering. So I started off technical and then got my MBA from Carnegie Mellon here and never left, unfortunately. So moved to Deloitte Consulting, and that's when I started working on new products. So a lot of what you'll hear starts in a career that's like over sort of 15, 18 years. I'm not even going to tell you how long. And then I moved to Intuit, where there's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of talk about how to build products. And I led customer and product for TurboTax, which is $1 billion product and tens of millions of customers. I've also run an innovation lab for a B2B company. So it was a 60-year-old company, had never launched a new product, and we got them to. And then the last piece of this puzzle is I do a lot of work with local startups, which is why I was so happy to hear about Kiwi Landing Pad. I'm in San Diego, so there's Connect, there's Evo Nexus, and I also teach design thinking and innovation through a company called Luma. So that is kind of where the puzzle pieces come together. So I've got tons of product, new product, existing product, launching, all of that stuff. So you can ask me any of those questions from anywhere. Okay, so what's product manager? Next slide, Jan. The thing about this is you don't go to school to be a product manager. And if you're sitting here and you're founding or an entrepreneur in a business, it's usually the founder who's acting as the product leader. So it's often CEO/founder. And often you've come at it from a marketing or a technical background, and you find yourself being the product leader. It's like, well, what the heck is that? And like, what do I do? Some things are pretty obvious, but some aren't. So I want to break that down for you. Next slide that we use sometimes is this person sits at this intersection between user experience and technology and business, and there's somehow the sort of kind of like weird hybrid that they can do a little bit of each thing. So it's kind of useful as a high level. Some people call them the GMs of the product. But if you move to the next slide, I hope we didn't lose. Yeah, there she is. She just went blank on screen. It's really scary when you're talking in a webinar and the screen goes blank. So we like to place product management as the owner of end-to-end experience, right? So they're connecting to user experience and design and marketing, sales, development, all of those pieces, product management sits inside of. And what they bring to the table is that they own the customer experience. So they're thinking about customer, they're bringing the customer point of view. They're often the voice of the customer at the table. And that's so important because someone has to be carrying that customer flag. And when it's the CEO or the founder, they're often carrying the business flag. They've got business goals. You've got maybe funding. You've got to meet targets. Maybe it's a marketing perspective in terms of goals and objectives. But who's the person who's continually living, breathing, sleeping, dreaming customer? That's your product manager. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, this gives you a perspective on how product managers see the business of a product, right? So I know that there's lots of things missing here, but remember this is through a product lens. So we start with learning, move to evaluating and designing, testing, making decisions about what we're building, launching, and then that cycle starts again. So the product manager, next slide, and this is just going to completely fill out, I think. These are the roles and responsibilities of a product manager. So let's break them down. So this is the job description, essentially, of what a product manager should be doing. So as you're looking at this, I think it might be useful to say, who's doing it? Are we doing it? Who should be doing it if you don't have a product manager in place? So starting with learning, someone is responsible for the learning plan. Someone's responsible for outlining exactly what you need to learn from any type of customer research that you do. So you start with hypotheses, you go in and test them. And if you go into a new market, you have lots and lots and lots to learn. So someone's responsible for that, as well as the competitive analysis that helps you to the next stage, which is, well, who am I building this product for? Now, a lot of the time, kind of personas are thrown out there, and they're a pretty picture. They're like, this stock cast photo of this like pretty person, and it means nothing, right? So much of the time, people talk about demographics and think that that's the persona. So we're going to talk about that in a minute, exactly what makes a customer persona that you can use in a product. Problem statement, a clarification on what you're doing. Now, you might look at this and go, well, that's pretty obvious. I can tell you in dozens of workshops, hundreds of founders, this is the key problem that people have difficulty articulating. If you just say to them, what problem are you solving? They'll tell you about benefits, they'll tell you about features, they'll tell you about market, they'll tell you about growth. But in a sentence or two, can you write down exactly what problem you're solving? So we're going to talk about that as well a little bit more. Product vision, product roadmap. A product manager has to paint the vision of where you're going and how you're going to get there. And that's just a fancy way of the vision and roadmap are just fancy ways of saying that. The prototyping, you don't want to wait for a designer. You don't want to wait for an engineer, even though it's super fast and cheap to build quick, usable prototypes. It's even simpler. You'll get more effective customer feedback if you do it rough and ready. If you as a product manager are out there with sketches, with things that customers can easily relate to, and you're thinking about the prototyping. So that product manager is responsible for that. Product and design specifications, right? Exactly. So what are the rules of the road? How do we think about this? Not at that specific minute font level. We're not talking about that. That's in a designer. It's in sort of the technical specifications if you're talking about code. But at a high level, think about, well, what's important to me? What are we solving for? What's important to the customer? Moving on to test, we believe in hypothesis test-driven anything. And so someone has got to be thinking about, well, what are we testing? Who are we testing it with? Why are we testing this? What are we going to do with the results? And then creating insights, which isn't just taking what customers say, but deriving what they mean from it. And again, that's a product manager. Moving on to prioritization. So this is where clearly these aren't to scale. They're not all even. But in this huge build phase, when you're iterating, you want to have someone actually own the technical specs and the product specs. Have that outline of exactly what the product should function as, how it feels, what it means to use it, where people are going to be using it. All those things that someone outside of a developer or a designer has to think about, the experience. And then, of course, if you're agile, there's the backlog, there's the product owner pieces. Those are the mechanics of being a product manager. And then finally, when you launch, have you put in the right product metrics? How do you know you're successful? How do you know what customers are doing? Someone's going to be watching that and interpreting it. A lot of time people put great metrics in place, but then don't think about how they fit together or have way too many metrics and don't know what to do with them. Communicating what's happening with the product, and then if necessary, pivoting, thinking about what do I use this information for, and do I need to change direction? How do I focus? And then it keeps going. So that's kind of like the high level job description of a product manager.
As everyone with us so far, does anyone have any questions? I think this is pretty interesting stuff, and I love sort of we're really getting into the detail here. So let us know. I'm assuming next slide.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so it's really interesting, but one of the traits that we found is common to a product manager is we kind of have a hero complex. Okay, so don't tell anyone. It's like this well-kept secret, but we like are there. We're kind of like in lots and lots of different places. You kind of saw it, right? From this kind of end-to-end experience ownership. So we've got this little magic invisible cape, but the main thing we're doing is instead of like whatever, like shield or whatever, we're waving the customer flag, right? We own that customer experience. You're thinking about translating customer learning into specifications, into requirements, but it's constant insight translation, not just what the customer said, but thinking about what they meant. And then if you get really good at it, it's how do you delight them? How do you exceed that expectation? That's what leads to products that customers love, that they tell people, they recommend you, and you grow and explode, right? Product managers take very focused actions. In fact, the best product managers we know are better at saying what not to do than necessarily kind of like constantly working on the backlog. They're making really, really tough decisions. So it's that focused action. So you've all used products, right? We all have that have hundreds of features, and it's confusing. And it's like someone went crazy and just tried to shove everything they'd ever heard into this product. And then it's unusable. You know, I've worked on products that have been like that, and most of the work has been stripping it and simplifying it for ease of use. So that focus is clear, it's critical. So I talked about customer a lot, but that product manager, remember, there's a business component. So they're constantly overlaying what does a business need. So are you solving for rapid growth? Are you solving for adoption? Are you solving for retention? What are the business goals? How are they measured, and how are you going to get there? What is the feature you're working on going to support where the business needs to go, right? That's the communication you need to have. And then finally, we've talked about this, but they're thinking about the entire experience. Okay, so I'm just going to end this product manager piece with a quote, and I love this quote. It's from the CEO of Square, and there's an app that's beautiful to use, right? It's super simple. It's just really just nice to use. It's nice to hold. Someone has thought about every detail. It's simple. It doesn't have 100 features. You can't do 25 different things with it. It has one purpose, and it does it beautifully. And so this quote, make every detail perfect and limit the number of details, should be your product manager's motto. Figure out from your customer what are the details that matter, and then make them focus on making those the best they can be. Okay, so that was kind of like part one. Are we good so far?
I think so.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions? We want questions. Keep them coming. Okay, next part.
Yeah, let's keep going. Okay, so excellent. Okay, so let's move to next slide, product manager fundamentals. So we talked a little bit about what makes a product manager, right? So that was sort of step one. Now, what is a product manager, like the fundamentals of waving that customer flag, keeping the end-to-end user experience? What does that mean? Let's talk about that next. And really, at the end of the day, it's how do you build great product? So switch mine. Okay, so this comes from a curriculum that we have for product managers. Remember I talked about like there's very little training. That was a gap. And so the gap in the market that we're trying to meet is how do you cover sort of A to Z of product management, and not just building a product, but like working, influencing others, thinking about launching products. How do you work with marketing? How do you work with customer support? We've got a whole week on just like how do you work with development? How do you be the most effective development partner that your developers love you and do everything that you want, right? Like, no, that what a product manager's dream. So this comes out of that. So this triangle ends with minimal viable wow. Now that's different from MVP, which many of you are probably using. You're probably using lean and agile. So MVP, the focus is so much on getting something to launch, getting to a minimal viable product that you can get out there. So I got to tell you, I hate that, right? Because the focus is on just building something and very quickly getting that something, learning, and then building it. I've seen a ton of crappy products being built because they're all driven by this MVP focus. So we want you to think about minimal viable wow. You can use all your agile, all the techniques. We're not talking about any development practices changing, but the difference is the product manager has to figure out what are you going to build in a minimum fashion to get it out there and test and launch, but it's going to wow customers. It's not just going to be launched and go bleh. It's going to like delight people. So it starts with a customer foundation, and the layer of customer foundation is completely the responsibility of a product manager. On top of that, then you layer on the goals and objectives for the business, the vision and strategy. And in our curriculum, we show you how to make decisions in a blueprint. But what I want to do is go back to those customer foundations. So next slide. There's of three things. It's the problem statement that we mentioned a little bit earlier, the customer persona, and customer needs. And again, remember, this is all from a product perspective. So a UX person will talk to you about a persona differently. A business person will talk to you about the business problem slightly differently. Just keep the fact that this is all about product, okay? So if we start with the problem statement on the next slide, I hear this quote, and Clay Christensen is well-known, Innovator's Dilemma. If you haven't looked at it before, highly recommend you Google or YouTube Clay Christensen and milkshake, and it will all make sense. There's like a 5-minute video that is priceless about how he focused on jobs. Now, the whole premise of problem statement is this: the jobs to be done point of view causes you to crawl into the skin of your customer and go with her as she goes about her day, always asking the question as she does something, why did she do it that way? So this gives you the sense of like you are there, really deeply there with your customer, trying to understand why, what, how, everything about your customer. And it's focused on this job. The customer is trying to do something, and either you're going to do it better with a new product, you're going to do it more effectively, more efficiently, more cheaply, you're going to be disruptive, you're going to offer a different way to do it. And you can think about every new product that's been successful. And, you know, we can talk about Uber, we can talk about, you know, Square, we can talk about, they fundamentally solve a job to be done. So what is the job that your product is doing? And do you all agree? And you might laugh at this, but again, I've been in workshops, I've had co-founders write down a problem statement, and they've been different problems they're solving. So you got to write it down, right? You got to write it down, you got to share it with your team, and you got to say, this is the one job that our product is trying to do, and everything that we do is focused on doing this well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the problem statement. I don't want to get sort of like, this is already a lot of information, but there's a template that we have that can help you. So we can figure out how to get that to you. So the problem statement, the way you start trying to figure it out is like, you think about, well, who's experiencing this problem? It's not everybody, it's clearly someone. So for Uber, it was people trying to get, you know, from A to B, usually in business, usually traveling, usually it started that way, and waiting in long lines. So they're impatient, they're struggling, they're kind of annoyed at having to wait. It's stinky, the experience is disgusting. If you ever took a taxi, and I can't even remember the last time I took a taxi, but if you took a taxi 5 years ago in New York, I mean, horrible experience, right? So it's disruptive. You don't have to pay, you don't have to tip, you don't have to do anything. So the job though is to get from place A to place B immediately, like when I want it right now, not waiting for half an hour, not having to book an hour in advance, but right now. So boiling it down to all those other features will come later, but fundamentally understanding the one thing you have to do absolutely perfectly. So think about that job they're trying to achieve. Think about how they're feeling, because this will really help you as you describe this. Is it frustration? Is it anger? Is it like just sadness? What is it? What is it they're feeling at that time? Are there barriers right now into achieving that job? Now, what's getting in the way? And I've worked, when I worked in finance applications, people would tell me the job they were doing. I would watch them, and they would have 3 or 4 other things like spreadsheets or calculators or their phone up, trying to do a job that they said that the program they were using was doing, but clearly it wasn't. So you've got to understand what barriers in the way of what they're trying to achieve now. So when is it happening? Is it all the time? Is it seasonal? Is it, you know, during some part of the day? Think about that. And then really understand the root cause of that problem. Because if you can get down to the core root cause, you've uncovered the unmet need, and that you can go solve. Okay. I'm talking way faster than I normally do, because I'm like, no, everyone's going to understand me, right? So tell me to slow down if I need to. Okay, so the next piece is customer persona. And I think I mentioned before that the persona is often used as a picture, right? People have sort of this high level picture. And I've got to tell you, if you've got demographics that you're thinking about your persona, you just got to destroy it right now. The persona with demographics is meaningless. When a product manager creates a persona, what we want to do with it, next slide, create way more than demographics. We want you to really understand your target customer. If you think everyone between the ages of 25 and 50 are going to use your product, you don't know who your customer is. If you say it's it's all teenagers in high school, you're still not kind of close enough. You want to get a really deep understanding of who this person is, what drives them. And we have a template that I will show you next that we recommend you use, because it touches upon all the kind of aspects that make sure you're really understanding your customer. So this template has a couple of sort of specific aspects, right? It has a background, just a little description of who this person is. It describes the customer problem, which you just did because you just did the problem statement. Then it starts getting into behaviors and attitudes. And yes, you have to become a psychologist for a while. What behaviors do your customers have? What's driving them? Think about their attitudes. What's their attitudes towards the task at hand, the job at hand? Is it something that they dread doing? Is it something that makes them really upset? Is it something that they look forward to that you can enhance? It all doesn't have to be bad. So we like writing the attitudes in the customer voice, because often these come from interviews that you've done. And if you do quotes, it comes it to life. You've got to find a picture that represents your customer. Go to stock photos if you can, if you want to. But the way we recommend you start is write down those behaviors and attitudes, and then pull out keywords, stick them in Google, and then find out those images that fit. So if you put in a couple of psychographic type of descriptions, a couple of adjectives, and the job, you'll be amazed at the pictures that come up, and one of them will resonate, and that's what you pop there. Then there's things like you can see the demographics and anything else, like are they low budget? Are they willing, big spenders? That kind of stuff is important, but really more relevant later on as you think about marketing. Right now, you're trying to create a product that people love. Okay, so that was customer persona. The third one, next slide, is customer needs. And so you're taking all this information and you're turning it into what do they actually need, not what they're saying, not what they're doing, but your insight or interpretation of what you can do to solve that unmet need that you've discovered. And I think everyone loves this quote. I love it too. If I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? So Ford. And so that's what we want you to kind of drive you, is they're going to tell you all this stuff. You interpret what it is that they can need, and then you test with it. You test cheap, you test with rapid prototypes. You don't go to your developer and you don't go to your designer and say, hey, could you mock this up really fast, before you've gone out and just tested your concept on a piece of paper or a conversation and got something. Have needs drive prototypes that are built. Until then, just rely on scrappy prototypes. So next slide. So needs, essentially, then don't describe them as features or ideas or benefits. Stay away from that. You're not trying to sell anybody. You're trying to create a hypothesis that you can test. I believe the customer need is, and then how do I test whether that need is true? Remember Uber, the way that they tested this was really simply. Airbnb is another great example. They were going broke, and they were about to shut down the entire site. They'd run out of money. And then they sort of said, well, what about if we just put real photos, not canned, not staged, but real photos? So they got on a plane, grabbed a Polaroid, took a bunch of pictures, and that turned their business around. They didn't build anything. They just loaded up like handheld pictures onto their site. So that's the kind of thing that, even for an incredibly large business that it is today, that was the turning point when they tested something really simple. So think about what they need to get the job done. You can make them either outcomes that they're trying to get, this needs to be met, or you can say these are the constraints. Depends on the type of application that you're working on. But they all guide every product decision. You can discover a whole bunch of things, you will prioritize them, but you'll focus on the biggest need. And the way that you do that should be no surprise. You've got to have empathy with your customer. So that was a lot, right? So start getting your questions ready, and I want to touch upon the Kiwi bit of this in the next slide. So here's my soapbox. You got to understand the US customer. They are not the same as us, right? They're just not. And you've got to be speaking to customers and learning from customers all the time, not just in this kind of like funny little, I hate the phrase, but requirements. That's meaningless. You saw the product management life cycle. You've got to have a way of interacting. And if you're sitting in New Zealand and you're going, well, how the heck do I do that? All the customers are in the US. You can do this in a really scrappy fashion. You can have friends of friends. You've got Xian right here. Like, use her if she's kind of your target persona. You have put an ad on Craigslist. This is kind of like the secret. Our accents, they freaking love them, right? So use it. They think it's charming. So talk to a New Zealander. You can do this for like, $5-10 and have this great Skype conversation. You can show them there's all these great tools for looking at things remotely. You have to talk to a customer. A Kiwi customer is not going to be a stand-in. You can't use someone else who's just come from the States or lived there for a little bit. You've got to go to your target customer to launch a product that's going to be effective here. And if you can invest in spending some time here, that's great, but you don't have to. You can absolutely do this remotely. I tested customers all over the States. I have customers all over the world, and you can test with them. So find a way to do it. And then the last thing, and this isn't necessarily for Kiwis, but in general, one of the things that you'll find is you're going to get tons and tons of advice. And you're going to have people, especially people who might be giving you money, like VCs and angels, but anyone, other founders, every conversation. Remember right in the beginning, I said no one at Vic would ask a question. Every single person, regardless of whether they've got a good question or not, will talk to you in the States. And so you're going to be inundated with advice and here you should think about this and think about that. And if there is a check at the end of that, it's really hard to ignore. And the only defense that's ever worked for me and ever worked for the companies that I advise is that you root it in customer learning, right? If they say, hey, you should do this, I think this feature would be the thing that would really change your product. It's thank you very much. Let me tell you about my customer. Let me tell you what I've learned. It's an incredibly hard thing to just talk over when you're rooted in customer learning. Okay, so that was a ton. So what kind of questions do you guys have? I'm going to move this so I can see.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So on that note, so a lot of our founders, when they come to the US, they sort of say, oh my gosh, I'm getting all of this information. But at the end of the day, like I'm the founder and I know my business the best. Would you advise that, like, as well as taking on like customer feedback, at the end of the day, like the founder is the one who knows what's best for their company and their business, and they should kind of put everything in, but then hopefully only take 2% that pops out the other end of the funnel?
That's such a great question. I think there's something to be said about intuition and gut, and the fact that, perhaps you kind of put all your life savings into this product. I still think that you need to listen to customers. Don't be driven by founders, by other founders, by VCs, by money. But if you don't, you have to feel like you have to ignore a lot of customers' advice in order to say, I know better. And I don't know that that's worked very effectively, because these are the people that are going to pay you, right? You are serving them. They're not serving you. You're not there to, if you've got a ton of money that you want to throw away on a product that you want to test, go for it. But most of us want to build products that customers use and love. And the way to do that is always, in my experience, to get it in front of customers, to get that feedback. The way you interpret that feedback and what you do and what you build with it is your special sauce. That's where the magic happens. But it's rooted in customer need, and you know that you're solving a need that people will pay for. Because at the end of the day, we're businesses and we want to make money.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions? I think I could continue on for a while. So I guess one of my other questions is, I think it's quite common in New Zealand where you get agencies, or you've got kind of like companies that will be a consulting or services company, and then they want to flip to become a platform or a product. And then it's like, how do you manage those two sides of the equation? And then, yeah, I don't know what my question is in there, but it's something we see a lot of. Also a lack of like customer research as well. I had a meeting yesterday where someone tried to tell me that New Zealand was really behind on payment technology, but we developed FPOS in like the 90s, right? And then I was like, okay, well, who are you building your product for? It's like a fintech app. And they're like, oh, we haven't done any customer research. I was like, how are you going to sell it to people if you don't know that people actually want it?
That's really weird, because every time I go home, I kind of everything is so much more sort of technically connected, right? I mean, we were paying for parking meters with credit cards and phones, and you still can't do that here. And the banking here is horrible. I'm always amazed by how much you can do back home. So I think that's rubbish, just based on my one experience. But I think if you, again, I mean, it speaks to people. It just totally flat out, you know, is astonishing to me that people will pour money into apps and build things when they don't have any basis that a customer actually wants this. And like just talking to you just then going, hang on a sec, but we have all this payment technology. They haven't asked the question. And I think that, you know, it's dangerous when we kind of are brought up, and it's a generalization, but I think I still see it in some of my nephews and nieces that are in New Zealand now. You're kind of brought up not to ask a lot of questions. We're brought up to sort of absorb, and we're brought up to listen, and we're brought up to kind of like then kind of go do, and we're very effective, I think, at go doing. But I kind of want to push you into an uncomfortable space of, even when you think you know, still go ask the question, still go find out, still go research it. If nothing else, you've got a big check, like mark against, okay, my hypothesis was absolutely right and spot on. But I can tell you, every time I talk to a customer, I learn something, and it's, you know, it's a surprise in some way. And it doesn't necessarily change direction, but it often kind of changes the slant, or changes your backlog, or does something. The other thing that I will say is, whenever you talk to customers, bring it back, take a photo, take a video if you can, and then play it to the team, because there's nothing like being connected to the customer, like for your development team, for your marketing team, whoever you have. Maybe it's 3 of you sort of in the garage somewhere, but if you show and play customers, people will really get excited, and they'll come up with more ideas, and you will then, you're leveraging your entire team, not just as doers, but you own the fact that you're building this product for customers together. So it just has so many benefits. That talk to customers. If you leave with one thing, go talk to a customer. Like now, as soon as you hang up, go talk to a customer.
So we have a question from Charlie, who said, what tools for product management go-tos?
The must-use tools. So, you know, there's a whole bunch of them. There's a whole bunch of ones that I don't think are very effective. So in terms of recommending them, you know, people kind of like, you know, go to Jira for sort of like backlogs, and I could give you some names. It's easier for me if you say exactly what you're trying to do. Even now, even like in these really big products, I still go face to face. I capture all my customer feedback. I, you know, just in sort of Excel spreadsheets. If it's Net Promoter, I'm downloading and reading like crazy, and I'm instilling. And then in order to manage your backlog, use whatever your development team wants to use. That's what I found, is like, be a friend to your development. Like, let them say, I want to use this tool, and then go figure out how to use it. Product managers can use whatever. So I know that's sort of like not a great answer, but there isn't some sort of magic tool out there that I was like, that I love this tool, go use it. I've used a bunch of them, and frankly, you don't need a lot as a PM. You need time, you need like going in front of customers, you need to be really good at communicating, and whatever sort of the actual tools you use are, it doesn't matter. And yes, we are still using the checkbook in the US. It's freaking sad.
And she wrote a check like 2 hours ago for some of our people here. I have a question. So what are some of the core differences between the product in the US and product in New Zealand? So one, I guess, tidbit that I came across when I first moved here was that in terms of like a website, Americans really like pictures and Kiwis really like words. So if you're going to, like in the US, you almost need to optimize your website to tell your story and your messaging and pictures and icons, whereas in New Zealand, you need more words, which is kind of funny, but also very useful.
And so, I mean, given that I haven't been home for a really long time, this is kind of anecdotal, but I think you're right. I've seen that too. Americans are super impatient. And I think Kiwis are more, I mean, we're more used to like listening to directions, and we're very, I think, sort of stick to, like, we're very much rule followers, right? I mean, maybe it's a whole sort of like Commonwealth British thing, right? But we like rules and we follow them, and Americans don't, right? So there's a workaround, or there's a quick way to move around something, like especially apps. People will do that. So that lack of patience needs to be factored in. If you expect people to read like 5 pages of how to before you start, you lost them. You need to start immediately. Like, you know, like every single thing, I'm like, you know, just looking around me, and my phone, I picked it up, I use it. Like my Fitbit, I put it in, I use it. There's no instructions. So that ease of use has almost become sort of synonymous with being able to like adopt a product and recommend it. If you have to read something, you're kind of screwed, right? So think about that in terms of sort of quick adoption in the US market.
Is that why you think product videos are so like key and expected in the US, and they're very well made, because people know that it's important to make the investment, because most Americans or people will go and watch a video in order to learn how to use a product?
I think it's way easier. Remember, like, I think the other generalization, and we're sort of getting into dangerous ground, because I mean, this is better over a kind of glass of wine and talking about it versus a webinar that's recorded forever. But, you know, it's interesting because the communication, like Americans talk all the time, and it's about communication. So like reading something is very different from someone talking to me and communicating. So if I can get like a 2-3 minute video that walks me through it, it's more of a conversation, right? Versus a manual that I have to read or instructions I have to follow. So yeah, I think there's a lot, again, in terms of like, how do you help people? How do you make it the easiest product to use that it can be? And how do you get people up and running as fast as possible? So it's so much of it, like chat, like it's people on screen now. It's, you know, there's so many ways to kind of connect people more quickly.
I think that was kind of getting into, like, it is getting slightly into marketing and using budget, but I think one of the things I really want to see Kiwi businesses start to do when they really are considering the US market is to really invest in some decent videos for their product, for their users and customers. Even if you don't have a marketing budget, I just think like it's so valuable to have those videos, and the American market really seems to enjoy them.
Yeah, and I think that you can do this like this, right? Just get a well-lit screen and get yourself up there, practice what you're going to say, and talk. It doesn't have to be this super produced event.
So we have a question from Bridget. She said, what's the best way to identify customer needs when they don't realize they have a problem?
So that's a great question. And I think what you want to do is you have a hypothesis in mind. And if you can talk about, and you can look at how they're working today. So whatever the product is, figure out, is it something that's a completely new to the world product, which is rare. It's usually something that's done a little bit better or more efficiently. And think about sort of what you're trying to do. Like, I mean, let's just use a Fitbit example. Fitbit didn't come with the job that we're trying to do is, you know, their vision is to make people healthier. And no one said to them, I want to wear something, because we all had those stupid step pedometers that nobody ever used, clipped on, you did them for a day, you lost them. And what they wanted to do was they created an ability for, I want to be healthier. And then the social aspect has been key in being able to kind of drive you. There's a specific limit, and then there's your friends who you're sort of competing against. So was that ever a need that someone said that I want this, this, and this? No, they had no clue as to the features. But what they were trying to do is they were very clear on the problem they were trying to solve. And then they tested their way into what does this product look like. So what I would say to you is figure out what they're doing now, be very clear on the problem statement, write it down, and then you can start testing the different ways that you could solve it. And they can be very, very different, and some very unique, and some things that customers would never say. But you're also not going to, you have to do that. You're not going to make a lot of money doing something that's incremental that exists today.
Great. Let us know if that answered your question, Bridget. Okay. I don't know if there's any more questions. So I think you have one more slide, right?
One last slide just to close things off. So,
right.
Yeah. So the things to remember, if you haven't heard it before and non-stop for the last 50 minutes, focus on the customer, go out and figure out how you're going to do that. And practice developing those customer foundations, like writing down your problem statement, get into those kind of good habits, create your persona, take some time to do that, and then really think about how you take observations into insight. So what do you see? What do you hear? What are they telling you? And then turn it into, so this is what they mean. And for Bridget, that what they mean turns into features, because your interpretation of observation to insight to need is to feature is the core job of a product manager. Keep learning and testing. Don't do it in the beginning and never do it again. Don't get to MVP. Think about minimal viable wow. And if you want more, I mean, we do have an entire sort of curriculum on product management that you can see at the site, and you can always like ping me, and happy to, like I said, happy to help any Kiwi entrepreneur kind of get going here. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us today. And this will be available online and recorded, and we'll also write a blog post in summary. And we're going to have another webinar next week that's going to be sales focused. But yeah, keep coming to these. I think they're great for building business capability. And thanks so much for our return visitors, and of course to you, Vidya, for taking the time.
Great.
Okay, see you later, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.